Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 22 So Game Week 21 was a little while ago now, but very briefly I would like to just review it, mainly because I want to spend a little bit longer looking at that Darwin 11-pointer. But there are a few things that went very well for me, and in general it was a good game week because it was my third green arrow in a row, and I'm starting to claw back my ranks where I would like to be. Not quite there yet, but I am moving in the right direction. But there were a few things that also didn't go particularly well. I'll start with the main thing that didn't go particularly well for me. I knew that there was a good chance that I would only have 2 defenders fit, but there was always an outside chance that Trent might play, but Charlie Taylor and Pau Torres both had a chance of featuring. Pau Torres in particular was supposedly back in full team training. So I decided not to take a hit to do Pau Torres or Trent to Estepinian. And in hindsight, obviously, Estepinian got the 8-pointer. That -4 would have been paid back immediately with a 4-point net profit. And on top of that, I would have had less of an issue going into Game Week 22 because I would have had a defender with another good fixture in Game Week 22. So that just goes to show, and not every time will it be like this, but it just goes to show that hits aren't inherently bad things. Even if Pau Torres had played and got 2 points, the -4 hit for Estepinian still would have been worthwhile in Game Week 21. So I like to try and prove on various occasions throughout the year that hits aren't an inherently bad thing to do because they get really bad stick, right? And I am a player that right now I don't really like to take a lot of hits. I try to avoid hits wherever possible, but I don't think hits should be seen as inherently good or inherently bad. You need to weigh up each one, and in any given week, a hit can definitely pay off. And looking back, that was one of the worst decisions of my game week, is that I decided not to take a hit to do Pau Torres to Estepinian. And therefore, I only played with 10 players. But to get a green arrow with 10 players is still pretty decent. The other transfer that I did end up making was I brought in Richarlison for his 8-pointer. And he is a player that I am very, very happy to own right now. And it is nice to get a transfer that you bring in immediately and that player does quite well. And moving forward now, Richarlison could be a very nice option, especially now that we know that Spurs don't blank in Game Week 29. If he's still getting consistent minutes by that point and I want to keep him, it's another player that I have available for that blank game week. Another decision that didn't go as well was the captaincy. And I've seen a lot of takes around Saka and Palmer. In general, I would say that Palmer is involved in a greater quantity of goals at the moment. His output definitely appears to be better than Saka. But Arsenal won 5-0. Chelsea won 1-0, and the goal was a penalty. And as far as we're aware, Saka is still first choice penalty taker. So to say that based on that, that just shows that Palmer is a better asset. Well, Palmer didn't score from open play. He didn't assist from open play. And in fact, the game where there were more goals and more opportunities was actually the Arsenal game. But Saka is struggling a little bit at the moment with respect to his actual output. And also, his goal threat in the last couple has dropped off slightly. His creativity is still massively up there, alongside the likes of Palmer. But his goal threat has definitely dropped off a little bit. And he is a player that, if he ends up blanking in 29, which I don't yet know at this point, he's a player that you could see yourself selling at some point to allow you to get HAALAND, Salah, Trent, and all of these players, KDB maybe, into your team. So I've got my eye on Saka. Saka's not going to go from being my captain in 21 to a definite sell in 22, of course. But the longer it goes on where his output and his performances have dropped off slightly, the less that you want to have him in your team, especially at that price. The only other player that I wanted to mention, because most of the other players in my team blanked, is obviously firstly Gabriel, 17-pointer, absolutely ridiculous. Arguably could have had more. And to be honest, Saka could have had an assist as well if the Gabriel second goal was given, which I'm not going to sit here and argue whether it should or shouldn't have been, but it was very close in my opinion. But Gabriel 17 points is the stuff of dreams. If you didn't have him, commiserations, because that is ridiculous to have that go against you. But obviously, if you did, you are loving life, and that doesn't happen very often. But he does have good goal threat, and he has always had greater goal threat than Saliba. And when his minutes are very similar to Saliba, Gabriel is just a better option. The reason that we've suggested Saliba in the past is because his minutes were better. But that was nice to get from Gabriel. And then we do have to just finish with that Darwin 11-pointer. I love him. I really do. And I'm a Man United fan, so it's very strange the relationship that I have with Darwin. But he's a player that I have had since Game Week 8. I owned him for large spells last season as well. I love underlying data. So when a player is getting the amount of chances that Darwin does, I love it. And what I'm liking at the moment from him is he's starting to convert on those chances. I'm recording this after the FA Cup game against Norwich. He converted yet another very, very good chance too. He will miss chances, but if he starts taking a few of them as well, and his minutes start to look secure, Darwin will be one of the best forwards in FPL. I can almost guarantee it. So I'm really happy to have him. It was delightful. The fact that Watkins, Alvarez, and Solanke and a lot of the other forwards all blanked, and Darwin came over with an 11-pointer, it was the best part of the game week for me by far. So another green arrow. with 10 men. The team's not in a perfect position, so let's now float over to Game Week 22 and look at what my current transfer plans are. So moving ahead to Game Week 22, I've currently got one free transfer and 2.6 million in the bank. And of course, it would be much, much better if I had 2 free transfers, but that isn't the situation I'm in. So I'll have to decide this week, do I need or want to use that one free transfer to deal with some of my flag players or to get a little bit aggressive? Hopefully, I won't have to take a hit. And after that, I then need to decide if I don't need the transfer, do I want to use it to be a little bit aggressive? Or do I think there is value in rolling it, especially if I choose not to bring HAALAND in for Game Week 22 and actually bring him in for Game Week 23. And we'll discuss all of that, of course. But I do think my team's in an okay position. I am glad that I kept both Trent and Salah, because whilst it has panned out in a way that now looks like Trent is a definite keep and Salah is probably the one to sell, I obviously didn't know that going into Game Week 21. So I'm glad I left my options open, because a lot of people would have naturally sold Trent and kept Salah, and now they're probably in a position where they wish they'd done the other. So I am glad that I left my options open, and obviously this week, it now looks more likely that I'll sell Salah if one of the two. But we'll discuss that throughout. Starting with the goalkeepers, Areola and Dubravka, I would argue, is still up there as some of the best goalkeeper pairings because they're cheap. Areola has been getting points recently, and with the run of fixtures that Dubravka is going to go on after Game Week 22, I still feel like that is a really nice pairing. So no issues for me at the moment. I don't think we need to discuss them a great deal. Regarding which one I'd like to start in 22, Areola is, of course, at home. And whilst Bournemouth are still a very decent team, there has been a bit of a drop-off recently. And I just feel like Villa away for Dubravka is a very difficult fixture. And Newcastle, whilst I think they'll improve with the upcoming fixtures, they have been the worst defence in the league across the last 6. And across the season, they're the 4th worst defence in the league. And yes, that is massively skewed by some of their games. And for example, conceding over 7 XG against Liverpool. But they did concede 7 XG in that game, so we still need to take that into account. So this week, I think it'll be Areola, but from 23 onwards, I will be happy to play Dubravka unless we continue to see some poor performances from Newcastle. The only defender for me that isn't flagged and therefore is least of an issue is Pedro Porro. So whilst I don't feel the need to sell him right now anyway, there's obviously no need to sell my only definitely available player. The only thing to note on Porro is obviously now we know for certain that Spurs will blank in Game Week 26, although there's like a 3% chance, by the way, that if Chelsea are knocked out of the FA Cup, then actually that Chelsea-Spurs game that has now been postponed or cancelled in 26 could now go into the midweek of 26. So I've seen some people suggesting that whilst it is now being confirmed as a blank by official FPL, it still could technically go into Game Week 26. Let's say for now, because it's what FPL have announced, that Porro or Spurs and Chelsea blank in 26. That obviously causes an issue for you because Liverpool also blank in 26. So if you've got like triple Liverpool, Porro, Richarlison, Palmer, you've immediately got 6 players that are blanking in 26. So whilst that's the case, and also now that Maddison's back, Porro will lose some set pieces. So there's 2 potential negatives around Porro. For me, he's just not a priority to sell because at least he's available. So Porro's fine. The next one that is probably fine is also Trent. So Trent got minutes off the bench against Norwich, which was really, really good to see. I think he came on around the 65th minute for Liverpool. And therefore, the fact that he was available to be on the bench, got some minutes against Norwich, you would think that he would be available for the Wednesday game in Game Week 22 for Liverpool. So whilst it's not a perfect upcoming 2 fixtures against Chelsea and Arsenal for Trent, I am delighted that it looks, at least, unless there's a setback, like he'll be available for Game Week 22. So Porro and Trent should be fine. And then I am still hopeful that the 3rd defender in my starting 11 is fine as well, and that is Gabriel. My only concern with Gabriel is that recently there were some Arsenal training pictures, which I believe were from Friday, and Gabriel wasn't pictured in training. I think Jesus and Declan Rice were the other 2. Now, we've seen this before, that players aren't pictured in training and then are absolutely fine. Some people suggest it's Arteta trying to play mind games with other managers and suggest players that shouldn't be pictured in training. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and Arsenal the benefit of the doubt and say that if Gabriel wasn't pictured in training, he probably wasn't in training. And he did pick up a knock in the back end of that game in Game Week 21. So there are doubts around Gabriel. You at the time of watching this may get a positive update. And if that's the case, I'm looking at probably having a back 3 of Porro, Trent and Gabriel. And then I maybe don't need to use a defender transfer. My issue is, if we don't get confirmation and it's a bit up in the air, I'm going to be left in a position once again where I don't know if I'm going to field 11 players. And when we get to that position, I kind of feel like I just need to just bring in a defender that is fit and has good fixtures. Because after those 3 defenders, I've then got Pau Torres and Charlie Taylor on my bench. Charlie Taylor is an injury doubt again, but he also plays against Man City and he also plays for Burnley. So I don't really want to play Taylor in any given week, especially this week. And then Pau Torres looks like he's had another setback. Emery said he was progressing well. He was in full team training, which was the latest we got before Game Week 21. But now he's had a bit of a setback. And apparently, therefore, they are taking it quite slow with him. And he plays against Newcastle anyway, in which you would expect Newcastle to probably score. So if Gabriel and Trent aren't available for 22, sadly, I am probably looking at needing to make a defender transfer. And whilst it is putting more money into my defence and moving you further away from getting the likes of Erling Haaland into my team, Pau Torres to Estepinian does feel relatively straightforward for my team. I do think there is another option if I don't want to go for Estepinian, which is Kyle Walker. My only slight concern around Kyle Walker is, as we'll see when we move on to my team, I already have Foden and I already have Alvarez. If I bring in Kyle Walker, say this week, for Pau Torres, really nice fixture, by the way, comes in and I start him, which is great, and I have him available for the double in 25, that would make my current Man City triple up Alvarez, Foden, and Walker. When I want to bring Haaland in, therefore, I have to sell Alvarez. And people may say, of course, that's absolutely fine. You'd probably want to sell Alvarez because if Haaland comes back, we've got a fit Kevin De Bruyne at the moment, Alvarez's minutes probably won't be good anyway. And I do understand that. However, I still think Alvarez will get minutes, and therefore in the double in 25, he could well start one and come off the bench in the other because KDB just can't start every game and play 90 in every game, and maybe Haaland can't either. And obviously, Alvarez can play both of those positions. The other concern is Kevin De Bruyne going to stay fit? I hope he does because I love him as a player and I don't want to see him get injured again. But he could quite conceivably pick up a recurring injury or another injury of some kind. And then I'm going to say, why on earth did I sell Alvarez ahead of a double in which he would probably play both games then? And the same goes for Haaland. Who's to say that Haaland manages to stay fit for the games after he comes back from injury? So I feel like it may be the case that I actually decide to hold on to Alvarez and bring in Haaland for someone like a Watkins. And if I want to do that, Walker would take up my third City spot and then I wouldn't be able to keep Alvarez. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit of thinking ahead. But for me, therefore, I just feel like bringing in a City defender is a bit of a risk. And therefore, if I am to bring in a defender this week, it probably is Estepinian for Pau Torres. So that's the current defender situation. If we get confirmation that Trent and Gabriel are both fit, I'll probably just rock with no bench again in Game Week 22 and just decide to not use a transfer on the defence. Let's move on to the midfield. So moving on to the midfield, we probably are in a slightly unique position where we're just not really going to sell any of our fully fit midfielders at the moment, unless you've got 2 free transfers and no other issues to deal with. But when I have 4 flagged defenders, Salah still in my team, and probably wanting to get Erling Haaland in 22 or 23, at the latest 24, and also the likes of Kevin De Bruyne are available too, it probably just doesn't make sense to sell the likes of Saka, Richarlison, Foden or Palmer to other midfielders at a similar price point, unless we have a real reason to believe that they're going to be dropped from the team or something like that. I will just briefly discuss each of them, despite me probably unlikely to sell them in Game Week 22. Saka's output, as we spoke about in the first section, has been incredibly disappointing. With respect to actual goals, assists, and FPL points, he's not really doing it at the moment. And when you look at the likes of a Palmer, for even cheaper, like so much cheaper, by the way, that really is, you're like, I don't feel fully comfortable captaining Saka. Lots of us did last week, and it's probably the final time we will for a while now, because again, he didn't deliver. He's not showing that explosive ability. He's not showing that haul ability. And it looks like, even from an eye test perspective, that he's just being doubled up on from a defensive perspective. He's very, very wide. He's dropping deep. If you look at the pass maps for Arsenal, he's basically passing back and forth between him and Ben White. He's not even able to perform the same sort of passes and crosses that he has been on previous occasions, which is where he picks up most of his assists. So there is a lot to worry about with Saka at the moment. But we just thought about captaining him, a lot of us. I did captain him in 21. I'm not going to go from captaining to saying he's a must sell. But if he does end up blanking in 29, which we don't yet know, we need to see the Chelsea-Villa game replayed. And obviously the 5th round draw will affect that too. But if Saka does blank in 29, we know that, or there's a good chance that he will blank in 29, it makes selling him a little bit easier when we are looking at routes to bring Erling Haaland back into our team. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm likely to sell him, because I'm not. But if he does blank in 29 and I want to get Haaland back in and I don't want to sell the likes of Trent and Salah, then he does offer a nice route, because he is quite expensive now. I've actually got the armband on Richarlison because I don't really see a standout captaincy option. Unless we get very definitive news around Haaland, whether he's available or not, and unless we get very definitive news that De Bruyne starts, I find it tricky to work out who's going to get the minutes in that Man City team. Is Foden still going to get 90? Is Alvarez even going to start? And if he does, will he come off early for Haaland? Or will De Bruyne start in the false 9 role and maybe see Alvarez on the bench? Like, I'm just not fully comfortable predicting the minutes for Manchester City unless we get some more definitive news. And when you remove the City players, it really probably is Saka or Richarlison for me. Some people looking at maybe the likes of Solanke, but Richarlison, let's review why he's a good option. He's goal hungry. He sits in the 6-yard box a hell of a lot of the time. His data is very, very good. His finishing has been pretty good recently as well, which is something we don't usually associate with Richarlison. And on top of all of that, we believe that he'll be on penalties in the absence of Heung-min Son, and Son won't be back for 22. So we're looking at a penalty take with great data, and his minutes look very secure at the moment, and Brentford are not defending overly well at the moment. They started the season very well, but we've seen a bit of a drop-off recently, and Flecken is just not a good goalkeeper. So I look at this as a good fixture for a good player on penalties with good minutes at home. There's a lot to like about Richarlison, and when there aren't many other standout options, I'm tempted. If I'm not to captain Richarlison, at the moment I am looking at Foden, just because out of Foden and Alvarez, I feel like Foden's minutes are slightly more secure. I think even if KDB and Haaland were to start, which again, I don't know at the time you're recording, I still feel like Foden could start on the left or on the right. Or he could even start in central midfield alongside Kevin De Bruyne. So I feel like it doesn't really matter who starts. There is still a spot in that starting 11 for Phil Foden. So I really like him as a captaincy option too. My only issue is I am guessing there. I think Richarlison's minutes are significantly more secure than Foden's. And on top of that, Foden isn't on penalties. So I feel like Richarlison has one up there as well. So at the moment, I'm currently somehow in this weird world considering captaining Richarlison. And then just on Palmer, this isn't a good fixture for Palmer. Liverpool have been exceptionally strong defensively this season at Anfield. And if Trent is back, and if Robertson's maybe back, they've got Van Dijk. Like, that is a good defence. And they've shown this season that they can defend well. However, it is Cole Palmer. He is on penalties. He's on some set pieces. His data is very good. He's passing the eye test. And if you believe in form, he is in form as well. So I don't really want to bench Palmer. And this is when we get on to, if I sell Salah this week, I am benching Palmer. Because on paper, he's the only one that I would really feel comfortable benching given the fixture. You could say we'll bench Saka because he's out of form, and maybe benching Saka would be the correct play, but this is one of the reasons why I'm not overly keen on selling Salah to bring in someone else, because if I sell Salah, I have to bench one of my other 7 attackers, and it gets into a really tricky position. We'll discuss it when we move on to the 3 forwards as well, because you could conceivably be bench one of those as well. Just on Salah, I don't know what the current situation is. I don't have an update as of now. I do think he genuinely is injured, and I genuinely do think that 21 to 28 days that we were given as a rough estimate from his agent is probably about correct. I don't think he was trying to get out of international duty. I don't think he was trying to rush home to Liverpool. I think he was genuinely injured, and he went back to Liverpool for his rehabilitation. And I do think if Egypt progressed to the semi-finals and or the final, I do think if Salah's fit, he'll go back and play that. And therefore, I think at the very earliest, we're looking at a 24 return for Salah. But it does put Game Week 25 into doubt. When you consider that the very earliest, it's Game Week 24 probably. And 24, is he going to get 90 minutes? Probably not, because he has been injured. And he may not even be there anyway, because he may be at AFCON or injured still. And then 25 isn't long after that. Is he going to play both games in the double? I don't know. And when you put all of that together, you have to say that Salah is a serious doubt for Game Week 24 and Game Week 25. And I should note that the double for 25 for Liverpool hasn't been confirmed yet. It may not be confirmed, but we just think it is very likely that they do get that double in 25. But let's say that we don't even know that he has a double in 25. We don't know that he'll be back for 25. Is it worth just sitting him on the bench, hoping that he is? Maybe not, especially when he does offer the most direct and easy route back to Erling Haaland. My slight concern is that if you do sell Salah to get Haaland, firstly, it causes a bit of a benching headache this week, which isn't the end of the world. But if we are surprised and Salah is back for Burnley in 24, and he's therefore definitely available for the double in 25, we are in a very, very tricky position to try and get him back in without a wild card or without a free hit. So I'm kind of going back and forth on this at the moment. My current plan is probably to sell Salah, but I'm just wondering, do I do that in Game Week 23 instead? Like, what is the value for me in selling Salah this week to bench Palmer and to use one of my free transfers this week when I may choose a different player the week after to then bring in for Salah? The only thing that maybe then makes me think, oh, I might just do it this week is Game Week 23 is obviously on Saturday. So there's only a few days between 22 and 23. Is that much going to change between these 2 game weeks? Am I going to be that much more certain I want to go for a different player instead? Salah could drop in price in that time as well, and we probably won't get that much more of a definitive update as to whether he'll be back for 25. So yeah, I'm going back and forth on it. The current plan at the moment, if everyone was fully fit in my team, would probably be to give it one more week, one more FPL game week, I should say. And then in 23, that's when I would decide who to sell Salah for. And then obviously I would bring in Haaland with that money. I suppose the only slight thing that puts a spanner in the works there is if Pep comes out on Tuesday, which will be when his press conference is, and says Erling Haaland is fully fit and ready to start. Yes, that could mean that he's still on the bench. And I think even if he says that, I do think Haaland will still be on the bench for the Burnley game. But if he comes out and says Haaland's fully fit and ready to start, it may be that we just decide to bring in Haaland this week. And if we do that, obviously I probably will need to sell Salah. I'm sorry that section was a little bit messy. I suppose it's not just as straightforward as saying, listen, Salah's injured, sell him, because it causes a benching headache. I'm not entirely sure who I want to bring in for him at the moment, and I'm not entirely sure that I need Haaland yet. Let's move on to the forwards. So moving on to the three forwards, Watkins, Alvarez and Darwin, all three of them are playing at home this week, and I'm pretty happy with the front line for now, but of course the main player that I'm thinking about is Erling Haaland, who is definitely in full team training now. We know that he's got a few full team training sessions under his belt, and therefore I would be very surprised if he doesn't get some minutes against Burnley based on what we know right now. However, he wasn't in the squad for the game against Spurs, and therefore I would also be surprised if he starts the game against Burnley. My current prediction is somewhere between 30 and 0 minutes. I think he'll be on the bench. I would, again, unless there's a setback, I'd be surprised if he wasn't in the squad. I wouldn't be surprised if he just goes with the team and just stays on the bench. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And then maybe gets minutes off the bench in the game after that. But I think what is most likely is he'll come on around 60, 70 minutes and probably score 1 or 2 goals. And if that's the case, it obviously becomes very, very tricky having Alvarez in your team because he's likely to start in 22, but beyond that, he becomes a bit of a doubt. And it also makes it difficult to captain him because you know that he's almost definitely not going to get 90 minutes in that game. Of the three, Watkins, Alvarez and Darwin, the player that I am most happy with is Darwin. And it always has been because I love Darwin, but it's lovely to see recently that he's also getting some attacking returns to go alongside the really good data. The fixtures after 22 and 23 are pretty good for Liverpool, apart from the fact that they obviously blank in 26. If they don't get that double in 25, which again, I don't know at the time of me recording, all of a sudden the fixtures look significantly worse because what we then get is 2 tricky fixtures, Burnley and Brentford, a blank in 26, and then also a probable blank in 29. For me to keep Darwin and be happy about me keeping Darwin, I think we really need that double in 25 to go ahead. And if that does, obviously, he then has a double of Brentford and Luton. And I would genuinely consider triple captaining Darwin. If Salah's not fully fit and available, and maybe Haaland's minutes we're not completely sure about them, and to be honest, the double isn't as good for City, I would be tempted because I think you have to have fun with FPL, and it's a decision that I would love to make because I do like Darwin as a player. You guys will know that have watched the channel for a while. But for the time being, I'm very happy with Darwin. It's good to see that his data is starting to be consistently met by the attacking returns. Let's just hope that continues for him. I've spoken about Alvarez enough here. For the time being, I would like to keep him. But as soon as KDB and Haaland are both fully fit, it probably does make sense to remove him. Because there's just not enough spots in the team. If Foden's going to play central, KDB's of course going to play central, and Haaland plays through the middle, there's no central spots left. And yes, we could see a situation where Foden goes onto the left or onto the right, and Alvarez and KDB play through the middle. But the reason I don't think that will be the case is you've got Doku and Grealish that can play on the left, and Pep loves Bernardo Silva on the right as well. So I just don't think when KDB and Haaland are both fit that Alvarez gets consistent minutes. But again, they both need to be fit for that to be the case. So if they are both fit, then Alvarez is the one to sell. But I am also looking at Ollie Watkins and just thinking, in a similar way to Saka, we're not getting the output from Watkins at the moment. I suppose the thing with Watkins is that his minutes are so secure. The fixtures are good as well. And he just feels like a reliable player that you can keep in your team. He has got a hell of a lot of points this season as well, but not on penalties. Villa aren't quite performing at the moment. Watkins has had a significant drop-off in data, and there are no doubles coming up for Aston Villa anytime soon. I think there is the potential to sell Ollie Watkins at some point soon. The price is just too expensive to keep him in your team indefinitely because he's got points in the past and because he's fairly reliable. If he was the same price point as Palmer or like a João Pedro price point, then you say, of course, you keep him, he's value. But at that price, when he again offers such an easier route back to Haaland than someone like an Alvarez does, you have to sit there and say you have to at least consider selling Ollie Watkins. So for me, at the moment, there's a lot of stuff up in the air. I need a lot more information than I currently have. it's probably between Watkins and Alvarez to be sold for Haaland. Alvarez makes the most sense, but Watkins makes it the most easy. And obviously, if I keep Alvarez and Foden and bring in Haaland, I have a City attacking triple up for the double in 25. And even if Alvarez only starts one of those games, he's still going to get more minutes than most people that have a single game week. So that's the current thought process there. At the time of me recording with my team, I would like to roll the transfer. I think it makes the most sense because I don't think Haaland will start in 22 based on the info I currently have. I want to wait a little bit longer to decide who I want to bring in for Salah. I don't need another attacker this week, and therefore if I can have 2 free transfers going into 22, it will allow me to bring in Haaland for free, assuming that Salah's the one I sell. If I want to keep Salah for whatever reason, maybe it looks like he'll be back sooner than we thought, then I can use 3 transfers, only take a -4, and find another way to bring Haaland in. For example, I could end up selling Saka and or Watkins. So I just feel like having 2 free transfers, delaying the decision a few more days until Game Week 23, I think that makes sense if possible. The only thing that will throw a spanner in the works, for me anyway, is if I don't have 3 fit defenders for Game Week 22, I think I'll have to make a transfer. If we get news that Salah's out longer term, maybe we just get an update that actually Salah's out for like 2 to 3 months, then you might as well just make that transfer now. And if we get information that Haaland is ready to start, if any of those things happen, I'll unfortunately have to use at least 1 transfer this week, potentially even take a hit. So that's the way the team is currently looking. Let me know down below what you think. Currently rated at 95% according to Fantasy Football Hub. So they still think the team is looking pretty good. I just want to take a brief look now at the watch list for Game Week 22 and also my AI recommended transfers. So for Game Week 22, here's my current watch list. And we've already discussed the defenders. I do think it's Walker and Estepinian. I think if you've only got one Man City player, and you can bring in Haaland and also Walker, Walker is a very decent shout, given that City are one of the best defences in the league. He's actually carried a bit of attacking threat recently. He looks very nailed on, and of course they have that double in 25, and they won't blank in 26. So for those reasons, I think Walker is great. But like I said, for me, because I already have Foden and Alvarez, if I bring in Walker this week, it blocks me from getting Haaland unless I definitely sell Alvarez. And I don't think I want to shoehorn myself into definitely having to sell Alvarez to bring Haaland in. So for me, the only defender that I'm considering at the moment is Estepinian. I don't need to explain why. Bonus points potential, attacking threat, even playing where he is in that sort of left centre-back / left-back role. He's still got attacking threat. He was actually taking some set pieces in Game Week 21, and the fixtures are definitely there for Brighton. They've improved defensively recently. Despite them getting quite lucky to get the clean sheet in 21, I think generally their XGC looks a lot better in the sort of second part of the season that we've had thus far. Midfield-wise, there are so many midfielders. I'm actually going to discuss in the deadline decisions video, which will be live on Tuesday morning, all of the midfielders that you could potentially look at bringing in if you are to replace Salah or if you're just looking for a midfielder in general. Of course, De Bruyne and Jota are going to be the main 2 that people are interested in, mainly because they both hold in Game Week 21, but they do both carry an incredibly high ceiling. We've seen on multiple occasions, not only recently, but also across previous seasons, that De Bruyne and Jota both have 15 plus points in them in any given game week. And of course, De Bruyne definitely doubles in 25 and Jota could double in 25. So for that reason, they are going to be very, very popular, of course. My issue with De Bruyne is he really does block me from getting Haaland in without removing various players that I probably want to keep and also taking a hit. So for me, for that reason, just due to the way my team is set up, because I still have Trent, because I don't have a lot of money in the bank and I only have 1 free transfer, bringing in De Bruyne just feels like it is forcing me into at least a -4, probably a -8 hit. And I'll also have to sell probably both of Watkins and Saka, not just one of them. So for that reason, I just don't think De Bruyne is the one for me. On top of that, I do still think that if you are not sure that a player is going to start on a regular basis, paying 10.5 million for them is ridiculous. I still think that is terrible value. I don't care who it is. Even if you told me you can get 30 minutes of Haaland on average for 10.5, it's still not worth it. There is no player in world football that I would have in my team in FPL if I knew that they weren't going to start on a regular basis. That being said, I do think there is a chance that De Bruyne does start on a regular basis if he can start to string together enough minutes. So if you are predicting that De Bruyne will stay fit and start more games than not, and in those games that he starts, sometimes get 70 plus minutes, then he is a good transfer. If you expect him to start half of the games, in the games that he starts only get 60 minutes, and in the games that he comes on maybe only get 20, 25, then in my opinion, he's not a good FPL option. It really comes down to how you predict his minutes, because we don't need to discuss how good he is. We need to discuss his price and his expected minutes. And if you are happy paying that money, you can still get Haaland in. You don't feel like you're sacrificing that much and you think his minutes are good, by all means, go for it. Jota, for me, is great. But again, his minutes aren't that secure longer term. I think for now, they're looking very, very good. My issue with Jota is that it's giving me more players that blank in 26 again. I already have at the moment Trent, Salah, Darwin, Richarlison, Porro, and Palmer, which is 6. Yes, doing Salah to Jota doesn't give me an extra one. It just keeps me at 6. But that already means that I have a maximum of 8 players playing in 26 without transfers. So I almost feel like doing Salah to someone that doesn't blank in 26 maybe gets me 1 transfer ahead. And therefore, whilst I like Jota, I'm sort of thinking someone else might be slightly better, which leaves the options for me at the moment probably Gordon, Gross, or Eze. None of them massively stand out. Gordon's fixtures from 23 onwards are very good. I've seen people looking at selling Gordon in 22, which I think is bonkers. His data's strong. Newcastle, even though they haven't been performing particularly well recently, their attacking data's still good. The fixtures are great. Obviously, no blank in 26. I quite like Anthony Gordon as an option. I suppose that his data is not perfect. Newcastle have still been struggling, and he does look a little bit run into the ground. But at his price, I still think he's a really nice FPL option. I've not even owned him this season, so it might be nice to officially own Gordon in FPL. Gross, I think, is probably my favourite option at the moment because his data continues to be good. I know he blanked in 21, but his data was good once again. I think it was about a 0.7 XGI, so I really like Pascal Gross. I'm still considering bringing him in myself, and the fixtures are definitely still there for Brighton. And then Eze is the final option in midfield. Penalties, minutes, decent data. I know people don't like Palace options at the moment, and I don't really blame you because they do look a little bit stinky. Sorry, Palace fans, but I don't really care how Palace are playing. All I care is that Eze still gets a few chances in any given game. And the good thing about Crystal Palace is because they don't score loads of goals, and because they're not necessarily keeping that many clean sheets at the moment, Eze is always decent for bonus points because there aren't many other players in the team that pick up a lot of bonus points. So I do really like Eze as an option. He could get 1 penalty in a game and comfortably come away with like a 9 or 10 pointer. So really nice option there. And then just to finish up the 3 forwards, we've discussed Haaland to death. I do really like Tony as an option, especially given that he doubles in 25 and he will not blank in game week 29. So Tony for that reason is great, but the fixtures outside of that are horrific. He's pretty expensive, and I just don't have the luxury of bringing in someone like Ivan Toney at the moment. And then João Pedro, I absolutely love. But again, given that I want to bring Haaland in for one of my forwards, given that I have a lot of injured defenders at the moment, I don't really have the luxury of bringing João Pedro in. So for me, it's either Estepinan's going to come in for Pau Torres, or it will be one of those midfielders will be coming in to replace Salah. And the only way that I'll really want to do that is if Salah's out long term, or if I need to bring in Haaland for game week 22. The only final thing that I just wanted to look at was my AI recommended transfer, transfer from Fantasy Football Hub, which is to do Salah to Bowen. Bowen isn't currently on my list, but Fantasy Football Hub seem to love him, and I don't really blame them. His data's been pretty good. The fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag, but they are still there, and it's not a bad fixture in game week 22. As you can see, predicted to get over 6 points in game week 22. Their other recommendation, if I just scroll down, you can just see that text at the bottom there, is to bank my free transfer. So I think it's a decent shout. I'm not looking at Bowen myself, just because I think there are some players for slightly cheaper with better fixtures coming up. And I think money is going to be an issue very, very soon. And I think you're going to want to try to pick good value players. And I'm not saying Bowen isn't. I just think there are maybe some players for slightly cheaper that I prefer. So just to finish off by looking back at my team, current plan is to roll the transfer if there is a way for me to be able to do it. Other than that, Pau Torres to Estepinian, Salah to one of those 3 midfielders that I mentioned, and then maybe Alvarez or Watkins to Erling Haaland. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 22 team selection. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Apologies if I sound slightly different. I am very, very ill at the moment. And ideally I wouldn't have recorded today, but I wanted to get a video out for you on Monday since it's been so long since the last upload. So if you have enjoyed today's video, please do smash that like button. It will make me feel much, much better. Make sure to subscribe as well. We are very close to 110,000 subscribers. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.